about to rain again here in Virginia. Ever since you moved to Florida, it's been raining nonstop. But anyway,
It's
guys,
probably
I
my
brought
fault.
I brought Ryann in. She's a good friend, a former colleague. She is an organizational psychologist. So her desk is really tidy. She spends a lot of time in the Container Store. Um, Ryann, why don't you just take a minute to explain what you do, your background, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So organizational psychology is kind of this business sense of what the psychological dynamic is with people. So industrial organizational psychology is my background. I have 2 master's degrees in the field, and I am all the dissertation and my PhD. So that's a little bit about my academic piece, and I specialize in leadership development and coaching. But professionally, I work in human resources. So for the last 10 years, I've worked with a variety of different industries, working with really people-oriented solutions. In the last 5 years in hospitality management.
Yeah, and that's I know that's what you're doing up here in Virginia for really like the #1 hospitality company here in like the Virginia Beach, Norfolk area, right? I mean, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we had some of the best hotels and the best restaurants, and I got to work there for about 3 years, and it was a really great experience.
Yeah. So working in HR, obviously there's different dynamics in hotels and restaurants, and one of the challenges with hotels I feel like is having to hire seasonally at times. How do you kind of deal with that?
Yeah, it's definitely hard dealing with the ebbs and flows of the employment cycle, especially in such a seasonal area like Virginia Beach, where you're really slammed 4 or 5 months out of the year, and then it essentially kind of shuts down and goes into hibernation mode. So one way that you really have to deal with that is like front loading your strategic efforts early into the year. So in Virginia Beach, the season is summer. So it's really your Memorial Day to Labor Day season. So we spent a lot of resources in our local community front loading that January, that February, that March recruitment effort, getting the word out there, really making sure that we knew exactly who we were hiring for, when we were able to afford to bring them on, and touching base with some of our local associations. So Virginia Beach Hotel Association, Norfolk Restaurant Association, and just making sure that we were connecting with people that knew how to tap into the community and knew how to get the word out there a little bit more organically. And then on the other side of it, getting those advertisements out, interviewing early. The hiring process sometimes is 5, 6, 7 weeks for roles, which might sound really crazy to a candidate, but on the inside, you spend a lot of time really planning and identifying the right people. So you have to give yourself enough time to really find those good people and bring them in early.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, and you said the hiring process can take up to 5, 6, 7 weeks. From most people's experience that I assume watching this, they might have dealt with that once or twice before, but a lot of restaurants are, someone walks in, hey, you worked in a restaurant before, cool, start tomorrow. They ask kind of 3 or 4 basic questions and don't really dive in. How can the interview process look better, and what would you suggest for folks watching that are trying to find the right people, and maybe they're on a string of misses?
Right. So, I mean, the hiring process is all about how it fits within your company. Obviously, being with a large employer, we had the capacity to have that front-loaded time. But if you are a smaller, independently owned restaurant, you might need to be a little bit more dynamic. It's a situation where you want to say, you know what, we need to think of the 3 or 4 pieces of success that we see. What's our most successful bartender look like? What does our most successful server look like? What does our most successful line cook look like? And what are the 4 or 5 attributes that person really has that we can ask in an interview and make that process go really quick? So you meet someone, they have experience. Usually by the time you're sitting across a desk from somebody, you already know they're qualified, right? So it's really just about figuring out the fit for your company, for your restaurant, for your hotel. So figure out what those key things are with the people you already have being successful, and then ask those right questions so that it's a really quick process.
That's great. I think that's really, really good advice. What are those right questions? I mean, we've all heard like, so what are your strengths, and what's your biggest weakness, or tell us about a failure. Those questions can be helpful, but what else? Are there any certain questions that you ask that you feel like get a lot of solid advice from people?
Yeah, strengths and weaknesses is funny because it's one of those questions where you're really trying to get a feel for that person's self-awareness, but it's a question that really stresses out a candidate.
I work way too hard. Like,
I work so much. It's my biggest flaw, right?
yeah.
Candidates don't really know how to answer that question. So you have to be careful when you ask a question and really think about, what is the answer that I'm looking to get? That can sometimes help navigate you to the right interview questions. And just thinking of some major topic areas. So really know, what is your mission? And how do you ask questions around that? If your mission is growth, you want to make sure that you're asking a question that says this person knows how to adapt, they know how to change, they know how to scale. So you want to ask a question that's going to be around, growth orientation. If you are family owned, or if you are really tight knit and that's how your culture is really bred, you want to make sure that the candidates you're looking at can really appreciate that and understand the dynamic. And maybe they're not candidates looking for a ton of culture in terms of policy, in terms of structure, in terms of really well-defined benefits. Maybe they're a candidate that is looking for something a little bit more flexible that fits in with their lifestyle. So asking the right questions around cultural fit become really important. And then in a restaurant, you really want to understand someone's capacity, right? Like how fast they work, how much they can take on, and then how they manage stress. It's a super fast-paced environment. It's super stressful. Money comes day to day, and that definitely attracts a certain type of personality, right? And so there's pros and cons that come with that, like any other personality, and making sure that you're targeting someone that can really handle that stress and really handle that flow for your outlet is really, really important. So you have to just kind of craft around what you're already working with and just making sure that it's all about fit. Again, if someone is qualified, it's on their resume. If you're sitting down having a conversation, you're connecting about fit. You want to really know that that person is someone you can stand in a building with for the next 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I've heard like the expression is like, don't hire someone unless you like drive across the country with them, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But so what about, I thought it was interesting. You and I were talking, I don't know, probably a year ago. And I was telling you about this book that I'm writing, and you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting. I was like, oh, like, yeah, you want like all A players, you want everyone to be, like the best, right? But then like, there's studies out there too. I know some like even like basketball teams, like they have too many all-stars, they kind of all too many egos butt heads. How do you look at that whole situation? I mean, I guess interviewing also is one of those things where the more, like anything, the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the better you are at reading people.
Yeah, for sure. So the concept that, I always like to preach is this concept of bench strength, right? So there's a bunch of things that need to get done in a day, in a week, in a month, and in a year. And everyone on your team should have a skill that kind of fills that need in your company, right? And when you're looking at hiring only A players, your A players aren't necessarily going to fill all of those needs. They're not going to fill every spot on your bench, right? Sometimes you need what we, maybe not so nicely refer to as a B or a C player, because they fulfill a different requirement for you. So like when we were talking about it, a B player, that's what I call the steady Eddie, right? That's your person that, are they going to get the most tips? Are they going to be all over your social media page, getting rave reviews? Maybe not, but are they going to show up on time every day for 5 years straight? Are they going to not start a fight in the parking lot? Are they going to know when shrink is happening behind the bar? Are they going to be able to have a nice conversation with your line cook instead of, getting frustrated when it's busy? Yeah, that's your steady Eddie. You need that guy. You don't need the person that's always going to be getting your rave reviews for every single opening. And then your C player, this is what I just call like the butt in seat, right? Sometimes you just have a lot of workflow. You have a lot of things coming in and out of your door, and you just need a body to fill a spot. You don't necessarily need a lot of specialized skill. So this is someone where like you just need a body and you need it now. And that's sometimes a requirement. And we try to avoid that, but the reality is with turnover and expectations and competitive job markets, that is sometimes a need that you have. So making sure that you're diversifying, how people show up every day, and making sure that you're keeping, your environment competitive for your A players too, right? Giving an opportunity for people to rise to the top and to advance. And then also just making sure that they have a diverse skill set. Your A players might be a lot of bartenders, right? They definitely have that alpha personality. They're definitely really outgoing. They make a lot of tips. They're all over, reviews when they're really good. But that's not, the right role for everybody. That's not the right personality for everybody. And sometimes you need a skill set for someone that knows how to unpack boxes and knows how to, do inventory counts. And you're not going to get your bartender in the back doing an inventory count on a Sunday morning and everybody knows it. So making sure you have that person that's willing to do some of that grunt work too.
So taking that dynamic you're talking about, one of the things I talk about a lot with my audience is having a standard in place and making sure that everybody it conforms to it. How do you set the expectations for? Because obviously the A player, you're probably going to expect more from them, but how do you maintain the standard while having different expectations?
I think this is really where it gets left up to your floor managers. Your floor managers should be setting the expectations. So if your floor managers are not leading by example, you're going to have a problem. This is where you're going to have people bending and breaking rules, not meeting standards, and just not living up to overall expectations. So I really think getting really well-trained floor managers that embrace the culture, that embrace the policy, that, know exactly how to show up every day and show people that by example is how you really set the expectation. You see it with kids, and we think that we change so much as adults, and we don't change as much as we want to think that we do. Kids act up when they see their parents acting up, right? So there is a little bit of that parent dynamic in management, and it might sound crazy to put it that way, but when you have a manager that comes in late or doesn't pre-bus or is a good dynamic with like a chef, you're going to start to feel that tension in the team, and they're going to start following your example because you set the bar. People don't, come into work every day wanting to jump over the bar you set. They're gonna see the bar here, and they're gonna come just as close as possible to the bottom of that bar. So if you need your expectations to be up here, that's where the bar is set. Everyone's gonna rest right here. Your managers start setting the bar down here, they're never ever gonna jump over that bar for you.
Yeah, no, and you see that a lot with so many managers. In a lot of markets, they're not great paying. They're kind of thankless jobs, and I think a lot of managers kind of just go through the motions. They're in the office a lot of times, and then they're counting the money, and then it's time to go, and they're not really actively involved. And I mean, obviously, they are like during the busy times, but I feel like a lot of folks don't respect managers the way they should, just because they aren't, like you said, leading by example.
Mm-hmm. And that's where leadership comes into play. Leading is not about driving tasks. It's about connecting with people. And so if you're really connecting with people, you're really leading.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I went to school at Alabama. Our football coach Nick Saban, he talks about like getting someone to do something for their benefit, and getting them to kind of, and framing it that way, where like, yeah, I want you to do this because it's gonna be good for the company and good for us as a team, but I want you to do it for yourself as well because it's gonna help you learn new skills or whatever else.
Yeah, in HR speak, we call it the what's in it for me. It's an acronym we use all the time. And it's when you're really figuring out like who are your stakeholders in a decision, or who are you trying to persuade. And it takes a lot of emotional intelligence and a lot of empathy to really tap into being able to answer that question. So what you really have to do is sit back and put yourself in someone else's position and say, if I were this person, what would I really need out of this to get me out of bed? So that what's in it for me concept is something that we always try to do when we're figuring out, particularly with changes or rolling out things that people tend to, they have that natural resistance to. But even simple things like persuasion, that emotional intelligence piece really comes into play of being able to empathize with what does somebody else really want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing that's helped me that I try and tell people is, there's like what you need to do. Then there's how you need to do it, but then a lot of people aren't very good at like the why you should do it this way or why you need to do it this way. And when you it's like with anything, when you understand something versus having to just memorize it or do it brainlessly, you're able to buy in a lot more too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every leader should see themselves as a coach and a teacher. They're vital skills to really getting your team behind what you're trying to do. And, you know, we talk so much about training in hospitality, right? Like it's all about we need to train, we need to hire, we need to train, we need to hire. And it's this vicious cycle. And I think a lot of that comes from not having that concept of teaching and coaching once the formal training is over. You can present information to people, but really getting them to understand how to live with that information, why they're doing it the way that they're doing it, really educating them and getting them to explore, like, you know, is there a better way? Do you want to share a better way? If there's a better way, can we use it? And being with, you know, that information can really get someone more engaged in their job.
Yeah, one thing that you made me think of is in my podcast we interviewed Chef Richard Blaze, and he used to have a bunch of restaurants in Atlanta. Now he's out in San Diego, and he was talking about, you know, when you hire somebody, most of the people in our industry are, or maybe let's say half at least, are kind of just passing through, right? They need a summer job, they need a job as a hostess in high school, or you know, whatever it might be. So it's like, you know, I'd love to like get that guy that wants to open up his own t-shirt shop, and okay, well, like not only am I going to teach you about cooking, but maybe we can talk about like some of the business stuff too on the side, where I can kind of help you move closer to those goals for yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean, everyone comes to the table with some degree of experience, right? And you know, you and I know this from teaching adult learners and being in academics for a little while. Adult learners want to be able to present the information they already have. And so if you're not leveraging the experience that your team comes to the table with, you're missing out on a really big opportunity to get them engaged in learning. And, you know, we see it in school, but you see it out in the field as well. As soon as you start kind of disregarding someone's previous training or maybe some, you know, other areas of interest for them, like you mentioned with business, you know, you might have someone in the kitchen, but they might be able to really help you with your budget. And if you're not pulling on those little nuggets of information, you're just going to miss out on possibly engaging someone and really also teaching them.
Yeah, one of the things that, I mean, when I had my restaurant down in Norfolk, one of our guys, he was kind of like our utility guy. He did a little bit of everything. Wasn't quite a manager, but almost could have been. And he still is a photographer, and so, you know, we had him do a lot of like awesome photography, and there's a lot of skills within the confines of the four walls of any restaurant, hotel, whatever.
Yeah, and it's super encouraging when someone's working for you to know that they're able to kind of express their skill set. You know, I think a big reason why hospitality has a lot of turnover, you know, outside of sometimes it being a pass-through job for someone and not necessarily a career, especially if they're a little bit younger, like students tend to really gravitate towards it because it's flexible, it's good money. But you start looking at people that have a little bit more of a hospitality career, and we're still seeing turnover. And I think that has a lot to do with constantly feeling like a company goes outside to get the skills that they want instead of just working with the team they already have.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, so the same guy, Richard Blaze, I was really listening to that podcast, which is why it's fresh in my mind. But my buddy Sean, the co-host, he was asking, he's like, so, you know, how do you, and I want you to answer this question too, but he's like, how do you retain, you know, good talent? And he's like, well, I love his answer. He said, really through growth. Like, as long as we're growing, I'm finding new roles for the people within our company. So yeah, what are your, how do you keep good talent around? It's like a $1 million question right now.
It is growth, and growth doesn't look like one path, right? I think a lot of times when people talk about growth in their career, they talk about being promoted, right? They're talking about, oh, how do I advance? And that's actually not always attractive to someone, especially on the front of house side. You and I both know you can make a lot more line level than you do in your early management days. And that's not always what someone's looking for. Sometimes that financial security is just too important to really want a title promotion, right? So you're going to have people hear that answer and go, yeah, I want growth, but I don't want to give up my paycheck, right? And that's a horrible position to feel like you're being put in. So growth doesn't have to look like that either. Growth can look like cross-training. Growth can look like getting to use your skills as a photographer, for social media, even though that's not your formal role. If you are with a restaurant group that has more than one location, pushing someone outside of their boundaries to learn a different style of service or to go to a different concept and learn a new menu. Training, we really overlook line level training, that peer-to-peer training. That's growth too, and it gives them a really invaluable skill set. So looking at ways that you can enhance someone's experience without necessarily even having to promote them or have it cost you anything at all.
Yeah, and I always say, like, how can you pay people in other ways aside from just money? Because, like, like a line cook, you can only pay up to X number of dollars. A lot of times we don't have the same benefits. So yeah, I mean, how can you give them new skills, new things to learn, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you have to follow through. You have to put your money where your mouth is when the time comes. I see this a lot in the back of house. If you have this hierarchy, you have this rank, right? You have your cook threes, your cook twos, your cook ones. You have different levels of prep cooks. I mean, you have serious structure and hierarchy in a lot of kitchens. And when you have someone really showing that they are going to learn a new station, that they're going to learn a new concept, that they're going to really drive a menu, you give them specials to design, they get creative. When the time comes that you can promote them, you have to make sure that you also follow through on all that work you did, because you're going to lose someone that's put in a lot of effort for you if you don't kind of put your money where your mouth is when the time is right.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know Rene Redzepi, but he has like Noma over in I guess Mexico City now too, but over in Copenhagen, and they don't have like no staff turnover. And then when someone leaves, that person has to find their replacement. She's like, because I can't let you leave until I have someone that can take your job. Love that idea.
And that's the mark of, I think, a really good leader. And this is an area that I love, is succession planning. I mean, if you're not taking the time to look around you and say, who could step in my shoes if I didn't show up tomorrow? You want to make sure that you're fulfilling your own responsibilities in your job and making sure that you're pulling up the next person with you, so that when you're ready for your next opportunity, you've kind of set up the situation and the team to leave with someone that can just step right into your shoes and really promote from within.
It reminds me of when I sold my share in the restaurant here. I didn't really have that, and so like when I left, the menu, they didn't change the menu as often. It got stale. It was all the same special. I mean, all the same specials we've been running forever versus coming up with new stuff like I always did. And and then 2 years later they ended up closing. So yeah, I don't know.
No, it's hard. And you know what I've seen, in particular, I've seen executive chefs turnover quite a bit. It's funny, I actually see line stay tenure wise a lot longer than I see some of the higher up kitchen positions. And one area that I think I've seen a few chefs do well, and I've seen a few chefs not really do well, is look at their sous, their chef de cuisine if you have it, and figuring out where they're not able to do your job if you're not there, right? I always tell people the litmus test is, can you take a 2-week vacation? If the answer is no, you need to work on your sous line, and then they need to work on their kitchen managers, right? You should be able to take a vacation. And I always give people that 2-week mark because it's enough to stress them out, right? It's enough to be like, oh, well, inventory is happening and orders happening and specials are happening. And, there's a meeting coming up, and you start to think of all the things you do in 2 weeks.
Around the scheduling. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so if you're not teaching, the people below you to really do that so that you can step out, that's really the very first part of really succession planning, is figuring out, can I take a 2-week vacation, and then going from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Because, and which is hard too, because chefs by nature, and I know you've probably seen this before too, and I was like this, and for me to take my first kind of 2 or 3 days off during Thanksgiving holidays when we opened up, it was like, I was like, oh my gosh, the place is going to burn down without me. And it ended up being fine. Like, I guess I'm not that important or special, but I lost my train of thought a little bit. So I think chefs by nature, creative people in general, I think are very kind of clingy to like the creative vision and want like for me, I had trouble not moving like the garnish on on certain plates, and like you want everything to kind of be the way you see it, and obviously you have to at some point give up a little bit of control and empower the people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to sometimes step outside of like that ego that's like, I've worked for this, I've worked really hard for this, I've learned a lot to do this the right way. And a lot of times with a chef, it's your concept, right? It's your menu, it's your concept. And so you have a lot of personal attachment to it. But sometimes you have to suspend that and say, it's really about the team, it's really about the guest. You have to be doing it for a greater purpose, right? And when you start looking at the greater purpose of what you're doing and you can release that, you start to understand that if you have a really strong team under you, it just makes you look good, right? And then you're doing less. So you look better doing less work. You can be a little.
And it's more fun. It's more fun. Like everybody meshes and it works.
Yeah, it should be exciting every once in a while that you have to roll up your sleeves and get behind the line, but people shouldn't expect to see you there every single day, right?
Well, at least, I mean, she should be there every day, but maybe not. I mean, that also
Maybe
depends
not,
on
maybe not sleeves up, right?
But I mean, I know I've a lot of my followers. And obviously, there's different sized kitchens, but I have certain people, probably a couple of times every time I go live, that talk about the chef just sits in the damn office all night, and like he had, and like I try and explain, well, like without knowing the dynamics, like there are things like scheduling, depending on when the schedule comes out, that need to be done, and ordering, and maybe you're talking with purveyors, and there's maybe new menu development type stuff. There's a lot of stuff that you don't see as a frontline worker that I think chefs could probably do a better job of maybe trying to give people a glance into what all they're kind of working on.
For sure, and right, that's what a stand-up is for. Front of house does it quite a bit. I think a lot of restaurant general managers do a really good job in their stand-up meetings, really going over the business.
Like a pre-shift?
Yeah, like a pre-shift. Like you're explaining a lot of your job to your line so that they kind of understand expectations on a daily level. But I think it taps them into your daily rhythm too. And it would be great to see, back of house start to get on board with a lot of that and really expressing in a really transparent way, like here's a lot of the administrative work going into what you're executing. And what's nice about that is it helps the individual feel a lot more connected to the company too. I'm speaking from experience of a bigger company. So I think people would be shocked to find out that a lot of chefs are getting 200 and 300 emails a day, that, an HR director is showing up in their office 2 or 3 times a week. It's pretty frequent. The workload's really heavy on an administrative level. And I think the more transparent you can get with some of that, people feel really connected to the things that are happening in the big picture.
Yeah, and then when there's that transparency, then there's maybe a little bit more of a mutual respect, and then maybe when there is time for a hard conversation, it's easier to have that.
Absolutely.
How do you dealing with like challenging situations, different personalities? I mean, what are some kind of, I don't know, like key bullet points for dealing with conflict at work, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's funny. I think people would probably be surprised to know, like, I've gotten into yelling matches at work and I'm HR. I mean, tensions get high. Sometimes you have to really have it out to move past it, especially when you're dealing with tempers and egos and a fast pace. It escalates, right? And we don't ever want it to go to that place. So I'll share a couple of things I learned. I've been in it. I'm not speaking from a place of, always keeping my cool myself. And I've definitely been in some contentious scenarios. I would say the very first thing you have to do is to be quiet. Conflict management. The first thing is to just shut it down a little bit. Give space for someone to express themselves fully until they're done. Kind of let them wear themselves out a little bit if it feels like it's getting really heated. Giving someone some space and some quiet to naturally kind of fill that space with their thoughts. they get it out on the table, and it gives them an opportunity to not feel like they have to keep defending themselves or fighting about something. Really, making sure that they've said everything that they want to say.
Well, sometimes that's all they need. Maybe they had an argument with their boyfriend before work, and they came in with this big stress on their shoulders, and just need to kind of get something off.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes people just want to blow off steam, right? A lot of arguments aren't coming from a place of them needing you to fix something. Sometimes it's just a matter of having to get it out on the table, and then they can move on once they've verbalized it. And then some other people, they really do want you to fix their problem. So it's finding out what is the root of the problem, what really happened here, and coming from a place of wanting to be helpful. It's not a good situation when people are trying to be right, because then there's never going to be a winner.
Yeah, I always say, like, something goes wrong, the steak was overcooked, or whatever it might be, and if you were to assign 100% blame to that, like, and there's two sides to it. Well, all right, in some situations it might be 95-5. Sometimes it might be 50-50, but it's almost never 100-0. So if you can at least claim 1% of the blame, well, now you can realize, okay, well, I can at least listen to how I could have done things better for the next time.
Right. Yeah. Take yourself out of the scenario and look at it for what it is, regardless of you. It could have been anybody that, was in that situation. And so it's really about solving the problem at hand, not about trying to solve the person that's in the conflict. And, every time I've had something really escalate, someone didn't feel heard, and someone felt like something was really personal. So I think those are the two biggest things of making sure that someone feels really heard, and making sure that you're not making it personal, that you're not kind of assigning, blame or burden to the person that you're having a conflict with.
It reminds me of a knockdown drag out that I had. So, I used to do a lot of TV, almost once a week or so. And, we had a smaller staff. So a lot of times, I'd be there, early in the morning prepping and everything. Well, every now and then I'd have a TV segment, and I didn't realize it, but my business partner, who can get a little bit passive aggressive, which maybe we can talk about that here in a second too. But and I think he'd admit that. But he got passive aggressive instead of actually bringing it to the fore and actually talking about it. So anyway, after a number of times going to the TV station, I came in, like, right as the lunch rush was starting, and you had to change, get my chef coat on and everything, and he just started screaming at me. So we had, like, I mean, and he's like 6'6", like
yeah, you're a big guy, so you have to be pretty.
And he's like way bigger than I am, and so anyway, he had the best interest of the restaurant in mind. So did I. So, like, maybe neither of us is actually right or wrong. It's just the way that we're trying to contribute. So being able to have a conversation about it makes it really, really helpful.
Yeah, and there's kind of two pieces to that too. I think the first is acknowledge that people don't show up to work
to be pissed off.
A really shitty job today.
Yeah.
Nobody does that. Nobody shows up thinking, I'm gonna really screw up. I'm gonna really piss somebody off. I'm gonna really make this, a difficult situation. Most of the time, most people don't come to work with that attitude. The reality is people come to work and they're trying to do their best. So if something's not going well, addressing them like, oh, you don't want to be here, you don't care, you don't want to do your job, that's not inherent to human nature. Human nature is that you want to use your skills and that you want to perform well. So you have to kind of eliminate this idea that the other person, is out to get you or wants to do a bad job or kind of showed up ready to, spiral that day. It's just frankly not the case. And the other piece is that confrontation, you mentioned being passive aggressive, confrontation is not always negative. Confrontation is literally confronting an issue. And a lot of times that just needs to be done. It needs to be put on the table and it needs to be hashed out. If you're avoiding confrontation, it's passive aggressive and it can definitely escalate a scenario.
Well, and I don't know if you've heard me mention this before, but everyone watching has, like having a 10-minute sweaty palm conversation. Like, nobody wants to, right? It sucks. But even like after, like, Daryl and I, like, went after it with each other, on the other end of that, like, we hugged it out. Now there's a better understanding for how each other feel.
Yeah, I mean, I can say 10 years in HR, I've obviously had a lot of really negative conversations, a lot of conversations that I was nauseous walking into that room. I didn't know how it was going to go. I've obviously been in situations that got a little out of hand. But I can say to this day, I don't think I have a single negative relationship with any of those people as a result of those conversations. We build it up in our head as this big, scary thing. And the reality is that you get better at it every time you do it. Everyone is used to it. Everyone goes through it. And it's not really going to deeply affect your life. You have to have the conversation. And like you said, you come out on the other end of it and everyone's happy. So you just have to keep your eye on the prize.
Yeah. So going back to, so you said you have the employee who comes to work, and maybe there's something outside of work. Maybe they got in an argument with somebody at work. Anyway, they're kind of checked out. Maybe they're not performing the way you feel like they're capable. How would you? I mean, I think maybe you pull them aside. Hey, it's something going on. You don't seem right. Yeah, I say, like, if someone isn't doing as good as they can, find the small things that they're doing right and give them like applause for it, or say, hey, good job with that. And then when they start hearing the appreciation from the person in charge or someone else noticing it, they say, oh, that feels good to get that, the positive reinforcement. I'll keep doing more of it, and then I'll start kind of getting back into the way I am used to working. But what are your thoughts? You're the professional here.
So one of my favorite examples of this was from a colleague who was an incredible restaurant trainer. I mean, she's really dynamic, she's really engaging, and she gave an amazing example of exactly what you're saying. And, this isn't going to work every time. And I'll kind of loop back around at the end to what I mean by that. But she gave this example of when a toddler is learning how to walk, right? When that toddler stumbles, you don't scold them, right? You don't ignore them. You pick them up, you get them to try again. And when they do it right, you applaud and you cheer and you get really excited, and they get really excited and they keep trying, right? So anytime you have someone that's maybe not engaging, not getting a new concept, maybe they're not all there at work that day, you want to tap into that positive psychology. You want to say, what are they doing well? What can I applaud? And where can I encourage them where maybe they're not fully connecting? It's not always about, punishment or kicking someone while they're down, right? You got to sometimes treat them like they're that little kid that's stumbling, learning how to walk. And you got to cheer your face off when they do something right. And you got to get them really pumped about the progress that they are making. But on the other end of it, kind of looping back around, you have to also make sure that you have a relationship there to begin with. And that's a hard truth for some people to hear. You can't decide a year into an employment relationship that, oh, I really want to check on this person, right? It's going to feel forced. It's not going to feel authentic. So always being people-oriented out the gate is really your key to being able to engage that person. Being approachable, caring about their life outside of work, and not just doing it when they have a bad day. You want to make sure that you're just authentically someone that connects with your team from the beginning.
Yeah, if you only do it when they have a bad day, then they're like, well, screw you. But if you're there all the time, then yeah. You remind me of when I was closing down the restaurant one day, and I had a buddy that was kind of closing the dining room down. He saw that we just got our asses kicked, and he saw that I was kind of back on the line with like my guys. I think I was helping some, but we were just kind of joking around. And my buddy, as he was walking out, I just talked to him for a second. He's like, "Hey, man," he's like, "That's really cool seeing you, connecting and hanging out with your guys. Like you're just one of them, pretty much. Because when you're in like the thick of it, like you're in the weeds, whatever, like it doesn't matter, if someone's in charge or not. Like we need to get the food out of the window. Whatever we need to do to make it happen, let's do it."
Yeah. And I mean, I could probably talk your ear off about some of the concepts in psychology that talk about, specifically organizational citizenship behavior. It's a really fancy way of saying someone puts in effort, right? That someone's nice at work. And the way that you do that, the number one way you do that is by having a good relationship with your leader. That one-on-one relationship has to be strong. And if you have a really strong one-on-one relationship with your leader, you're kind of a nice person at work. We've proved it in science for a really long time.
Well, and then like there's like the quote that's like people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses, something like that.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why I'm in Virginia now, because I had a boss in Atlanta that we did not get along, and I mean, she was not pleasant to be around. I wasn't empowered. Like there was nothing redeeming about the relationship that we had. I talk about her a lot. One of these days, she's going to find one of these videos, and I'm going to feel really bad about it. But
yikes!
yeah,
my boss actually had this really interesting way of framing. Anytime someone would leave, she would always ask me, "Did we fire them or did they fire us?" And I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I think sometimes when you're in a position of power and you fire people, right? That can give you this idea that you have control. And the reality is that when people quit, they fired you. And you want to make sure that you're really minimizing that. And I always said, no call, no shows are rampant, right? People that are leaving hospitality sometimes don't even give you the courtesy of a phone call, let alone notice, right? And
I've been there before. Now here I am talking about it.
yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, I remember, in college, I worked at Chili's in college, and that's how people quit. They just stopped showing up. And the reality is that
I was Applebee's.
we were in this
for like a month. For like a month, I just didn't show up. But I was working with my sister, so then like they gave her a hard time because I didn't show up, so I felt bad. Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
You can't mess with the sister, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if someone doesn't show up, they fired you, and they're making it very clear how they felt about that working relationship.
And so do you see that as a sign, maybe both, but a sign of immaturity on their end, or is it a sign of, well, what, like, you hear like in like Silicon Valley talk about like, like exit, like interviews or like post-mortem, things like that, where something doesn't go right. So afterwards, in retrospect, what could we have done differently? Do you think it's maybe both? Like, what could we have done differently, and that was maybe a little bit immature on their end?
I think that for the most part, any time that you're talking about patterns, I'm a big statistics nerd, so I'm sorry for anybody that doesn't love statistics as much as, the doctoral candidate over here. But everything falls in a bell curve, right? So you have like the lower 5-10%, you have your 80 to 90%, and then your upper 5-10%. And the reality is, if you see a pattern, for the most part, the majority of people are going to fall into that middle. So it's going to be some balance of maturity and some balance of us not doing something right. Yeah. You start to look at the lower end. All right, it's our fault. In the upper end, it's all their fault. But those are
Right.
really your outliers. Those are your extremes. So I would say for the most part, patterns of behavior, it's going to be a blend of both of those issues. And even though exit interviews are helpful, you are talking to somebody usually after they've already left. And so the perspective on how they enjoyed the job while they had it is going to be pretty skewed, right? I think a much better way of tapping into understanding your turnover is having stay interviews. Why are the people that are working there staying? It's great to sometimes give that squeaky wheel a little bit of oil and figure out, is there one thing that we're doing that is just the nail in the coffin? Is there something that we're doing that's just really making people leave? But you might find that one thing, you may or may not be able to fix it. Focusing on the things that you're doing really, really well and really bolstering a reason people stay, I think is an actual much better use of your time. And then you're talking to people that are already having that experience, they're already living in that environment. So you don't have that skew of maybe they had an argument, maybe they had a bad day, maybe a better offer just came along, maybe they're immature. You eliminate a lot of that bias out of it, and you're really getting down to the root of why people do want to work for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We did talk a little bit, obviously, before about, why people do stay. So obviously, being able to, learn new skills, getting paid in other ways kind of thing, what's in it for me. Then also, I think, I've heard this somewhere, maybe read it somewhere, but, having a very clear definition or understanding of, what success looks like for this role. I think a lot of, especially probably more in independent restaurants, but just probably in business in general, like there's a lot of, it's kind of murky versus, what are my, if I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, every single day, and I do that, then I'm going to feel probably better about it, versus if it's kind of up in the air, that means you're probably kind of, I don't know, like a little bit kind of manic and all over the place, and aren't going to be the same person every day. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hard to have formal reviews, right? It's a lot of work. And not every single company is set up to have, annual merit conversations and performance reviews and all these metrics. It's great if you can. It's great if that's within your strategy, and it's great if it's within your resources. But that's just not the reality. I mean, hospitality is a several billion-dollar industry, and a lot of that is made up with independent proprietors. And, they're not working with this fancy software. They're not, trained to make these, performance management forms. And it's really hard for them to take weeks out of their year to have these conversations. And so you have to figure out, how do I let someone know what the expectations are and how they fall in line with those expectations for the right size and the right resources that you have. And sometimes that just means having a talk every day, really quick. Sometimes that means, formal reviews, and there's a lot of different options in between.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of just at least having I don't know, at least once every couple of weeks, kind of like, 5-minute check-in, nothing formal, but hey, like, what can I do better? How can we help better support you? And here are a few things maybe for you to think about that I think will help you, progress in your career.
Yeah, and that's really where that coaching competency comes in. I know, when we first started talking, I mentioned the importance of being a teacher and a coach. And, teaching is great when you're training, and coaching is great when you're managing performance. So that's another key competency in leadership, is just knowing how to have that conversation of digging into how can they, best drive themselves forward and how well they're doing overall.
Yeah, I like that. So we're at a weird time right now with COVID and all that kind of stuff, and we'll see what happens with restaurants closing, and one thing I think that is helpful for some people that maybe are in the industry but we're kind of passing through and got stuck, is that, all right, well, here's your time to kind of move on and find something else. But how do you see? I mean, how can we think about this kind of weird time we're in with hiring, with retaining, with communication, all that kind of stuff?
Man, it has turned everything on its head, right? I mean, if you start looking at some of the really big restaurant chains, I think that they're a real clue to the direction that things are moving in. We were able to see companies that had a lot of structure already built into their systems really do just fine during all of this. You saw chains that had to-go set up, delivery set up, proper sanitation techniques, trained management. Those were the companies that were able to turn on a dime, shift their revenue into a different part of their business, and really work on growing that piece to make up for the losses that we're seeing with capacity and restrictions and closures. So I think knowing how to be really dynamic, it all starts in the top. It all starts with your leadership and your structure, and really having a diverse enough strategy behind your restaurant or your hotel or any other hospitality concept to figure out, how do you serve your customer? Who is your customer? What do they want from you? And how do you provide that? And I think that's really the key when it comes to retaining people through all of this, is they really want a sense of comfort and security. So if they know there is something for them to do, there is a restaurant to return to, there's a place to come back to when it's over, that sanitation's being taken seriously, that you're leading with a people first mentality, and that you're able to be flexible and dynamic as a leader to make sure that the business is still working, that's going to buy you a lot of credit with the job market. They're going to look at this and go, you know what, things got really crazy, but they got crazy for everybody, and I worked somewhere where they were able to figure it out. And then the other piece is just over communicate. I cannot ever say this enough. Ironically, I cannot communicate enough how important it is. I mean, I opened a hotel in the middle of the pandemic, and that was obviously a challenge. And retaining people through that process that had not even stepped foot in our brand new building yet was not an easy feat. And I think that we were able to retain the people that we did because we were proactive when we communicated. We gave them more information than they probably needed. It was super frequent. We used text, we used emails, we used phone calls, we used Zoom. Every form that we could get communication out to them, we did, and everything that was important was in writing. And they knew who they could call. We set up a private inbox specifically for people that we had hired before the pandemic so that they could ask one-on-one questions, and we had a whole HR team behind that inbox ready to answer their questions and connect with them. I know not everyone has that resource, but everyone has some resources, right? Everyone has ways that they can communicate, and you just have to push those channels as much as you can.
Yeah, I mean, I always make the analogy of like you go on a first date with somebody and say, "Oh yeah, it was great," and then like you text them or you call them, or if you're the chick, maybe like you don't hear back from them, you're like, "Oh my gosh, like it didn't go as well as I thought." Like when you don't hear or have the communication, you start to kind of fill in the blanks.
Absolutely, you don't know where someone's going to go with that, and quite frankly, they're going to go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and at the end of the day, like, yeah, making the staff feel safe, physically, but also, emotionally, all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, it's weird times, for sure. One thing I wanted to mention again too is, and you're kind of talking about like, with like having the systems, all that kind of stuff put in place, and is like if you really know who you are, you're going to attract the right people. They're going to support the business versus, oh man, we have to wear masks again today, kind of, like that whole mentality.
Yeah, if you really care about each other, you're going to take care of each other. And when it comes to your customer, this is an interesting piece of information I actually just recently heard, and it was important to hear it. And so I think that it kind of fits well with this, is that when you're trying to grow a part of your business, so say you didn't have like a thriving delivery service, and now all of a sudden you're really trying to make sure that that part of your business is taking off, people go out and they're trying to find new customers. They're trying to grow this base of customers. And the reality is that you really can just focus on the ones you already have. Pay attention to who you've already attracted. Pay attention to who's already, loyal to your business and your brand and your services, and really make sure you're addressing their needs, because that's going to really organically get you to where you need to go. It's not always about going out into the market and trying to find something new and different that you haven't tapped into before. Sometimes it's just about strengthening your current positioning.
Yeah, it reminds me of when, once things kind of started to go a little bit back to normal and like people started to be able to, eat in restaurants again. I was telling people like everyone's going to go out to dinner or lunch, whatever, that first time. Why is somebody going to choose your place? And so like being like having like it's an opportunity for places that need a fresh start to kind of start anew and maybe do things the right way this time. I don't know.
Yeah, and there should be alignment in everything you do. I always try to say a mission statement is only words unless you're really living it. So it's great if you have goals and a mission statement, but you should hire to that standard. You should market to that standard. You should deliver to that standard. You should grow to that standard, and you should really walk the talk. So there should be alignment through all phases of your business to make sure that, you as a leader, you've really framed your business the right way and everything kind of falls into place accordingly.
Well, and I mean, like hiring and marketing and growth, those should all be kind of, in a sense, conjoined at the hips a little bit. They all kind of go along with each other.
Yeah, I had a great visualization that someone shared with me once, that being a leader is like being a conductor. So you can have all these different areas of the choir, and you can have singers, and you can have instruments, and you can have, your audience, and you have but if you don't have a conductor telling everybody, when to start, when to stop, when to get louder, when to get softer, it's just going to be a big mess.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me of another guy we interviewed for our podcast, David Burkus. If you don't know him, you should check him out. He's a really good marketing management guy. But he says, I think he took it from somebody else, but in one of his books, he says, this is talking about like in like a blue collar saying, but the leader doesn't innovate the product; they innovate the factory. And so it's all the different pieces that you have to make sure that are in place. And systems obviously really help that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, Ryan, what haven't we touched on? We've been, I think, across the board on a lot of good stuff here. What is there different pieces that you like? I haven't thrown out there yet. Anything that, without getting into your dissertation or anything like that? I mean,
No, we won't get into that. I don't think anyone has the time, and I certainly don't have the energy to regurgitate all of that information. But I will say that, if there's one takeaway from this whole thing is that, regardless pandemic or not, hiring troubles or not, confrontation or not, at the end of the day, the number one leadership competency that someone should really take away from this is understanding the concept of being people oriented, and that, your job is really to connect with people. And at the end of the day, that's going to lead you in the right direction in all areas of your business.
yeah, and that it creates an environment people want to be a part of. It keeps people around. And at the end of the day, you go home and you feel better too.
Yeah, absolutely. You can feel good about the work that you do when you are positively affecting all the people around you.
Yeah, and it's easier to notice all that good stuff too.
Oh,
I always say like that food or drinks or a restaurant is just a vehicle for something else, for be able to have a positive impact on someone else's life, and that can sometimes be your employees, but sometimes it can be the people that come in to eat or drink too. So yeah. Well, Ryan, you have a website, right?
I do. Yep. I have a coaching website for executive leadership coaching. It is called thevirgohouse.com, and I am taking on clients for executive coaching. So check it out.
Awesome. Well, cool, Ryan, and let's do it again once. It'll be interesting to see kind of how this whole COVID. You think what do you see as things going back to normal? Like maybe like early next year, things going back to more normalish, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard through the grapevine some of the really big companies are expecting to stay, work from home status quo until at least January of 2021. Some are pushing as late as next summer, so I think it might be a slow process getting kind of back into society. And I think a lot of things will look different once we get back out there. But I would say, 6 to 8 more months of this would probably not be too crazy.
Yeah, it might be too crazy, unfortunately. Yeah, I'll barricade up in the house here. Well, Ryan, it's been fun. Oh, I know. Yeah, I'm in full quarantine mode. Like no shaving, nothing. I mean, I need a haircut. Probably need to shower more than once a week.
Never did I think that I would do an interview in a hoodie, but here we
are. Here we are.
Try less.
Yeah. Well, let's do it again once things are back moving in the right direction. But thank you for hanging out. It's awesome to chat with you as always, especially now that you're down in Florida.
Thanks.
But thank you. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
We'll talk soon. All right, girl. All right, bye.
Bye.